What is the state of mental health in America? How did we get to the point where about 30 million Americans are on antidepressants? The recent shooting of a congresswoman and periodic violent flare-ups in schools and universities across America would lead me to believe that we aren't doing especially well with regard to mental health. With us today is Dr. Juneja, a leading psychiatrist whose main focus includes psychopharmacological and psychotherapeutic intervention of individuals, couples, and families. Dr. Juneja, whose upcoming book addresses the essentials of American mental and spiritual health, joins us for the mental health installment of Breaking Through. I'm your host, W.J. O'Reilly. Dr. Raj, may I call you that?
Of course.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You have an impressive array of affiliations: the NYU Psychoanalytic Institute, William Allison White, St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, and Columbia University. What is your perspective on mental, and I would add spiritual health? How are we doing as a country?
Well, I think as a country we're in the midst of change. I think people want more. People want to be happier. And they've realized that money is not necessarily the answer. Even though that is kind of what we have been conditioned to believe through the age of industrialism. But above 70,000 is kind of around that number. Happiness doesn't seem to increase. People seem to be happier up to that number, as far as this annual salary goes. But after that, it falls off. So clearly, there are a number of different factors involved.
So it is a matter of economics, kind of law of diminishing returns, you might say.
Well, I mean, to a certain extent. Again, to a certain extent. If you're worried about how you're going to put food on the table and pay your electric bill, there's a different level of stress versus if those things are essentially taken care of.
Some, and perhaps this dovetails with what you just said, some have called our society one of envy. Would you agree that, in what part might this play in the scheme of mental and spiritual health?
Well, in India, it's interesting. I was born in India, but there's always been a huge movement to become more westernized. So I remember back, in the 90s when you would go visit India, some of these cafes would have tape recordings of various American radio stations playing. So there's been a big push to move towards the West. The idea being that if you had more money, you would be happier. But again, that's not true. That's not exactly true.
So money is actually the central determinant of being westernized.
Well, a lot of people think that, especially the ones that don't live in this country. Especially that, if they don't live here, they think to some level money's easy to get here. And clearly I think we know that's not accurate.
In your observation, would you say that people in India, for example, in other countries, the more westernized they become, that there's been kind of a fall off in their ability just to experience their lives with satisfaction?
Well, I think what in the United States at least, it's very difficult for us to relax. Think of the European culture and coming home for lunch, or even in India, coming home for lunch and then going back to work. Here, working till 8 p.m. seems absolutely okay. So we've gotten into keeping up with the Joneses. We've gotten into this idea that we got to somehow make that money, buy that car, buy that house, and that will be the end-all, be-all. But clearly it's not.
There was a time when psychiatrists met with patients, once or more a week and actually talked about things. Today it's more, once a month to have your prescription re-upped. What's been driving this trend, and do you agree that it exists, and where do you think it's leading us?
Well, back in the 1980s, we had a big change in psychiatry. Essentially, a lot of psychopharmacological, a lot of medications started coming out into the market. Before that, it was not uncommon that most psychiatrists would go and be also trained as excellent psychotherapists or psychoanalysts. But what's happened is that the trend has gotten to be more psychopharmacologically oriented for psychiatry. Now, that doesn't mean that that the at least in my mind, what I consider psychiatrist, somebody who is both trained in psychotherapy as well as psychopharmacology and medicine, that does not exist. I mean, I can proudly say many of my colleagues and friends that are practicing in the field are also therapists. I myself consider myself excellent at both. But if you go into more rural America, really most of America, a lot of it has become about the prescription pad, and it's unfortunate.
Would you say that a culture that supports sincere and meaningful communication in the family and also in friendships would tend to produce healthier people?
The study that comes to mind out of Columbia, they looked at only looked at two things.
Columbia, the university, not the country?
Yeah, no, yes, Columbia University.
Just to clarify.
In fact, the Addiction Institute up there. They looked at the number of dinners that a family has together a week, and they just grouped 0 to 2 dinners on one side and 3 to 7 dinners on the other, and looked at substance abuse rates. The families actually that met and ate dinner together 3 to 7 times a week significantly lower substance abuse rates. They weren't looking for anything else other than did they sit and have dinner together, right? So there's something about sitting around the dinner table and asking Johnny, hey, how'd school go today? And and all of us, or excuse me, all of the family members communicating. There's something that I think is inherently valuable in that, and seems to be, again, lost in our society.
Look at this, actually the power of such simple tribal,
Yes.
kinds of activities that we have learned to do without.
That's right. That's right.
How about the issue of personal responsibility? I've heard it said that the degree to which a person can say, I'm responsible, could be seen as an indicator of one's mental health. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's no other way. And I frequently tell my clients, that, listen, I can't save you. You have to save you. I can help you. I can guide you. I can be, part of the team. But you have to do the work. I frequently say that unless we can own our behaviors, i.e. take full responsibility, you can't change it. If I'm blaming you, how can I possibly change something about myself? One of my mentors always used to say that you can alter your life by changing your thoughts. But we have to change how we think, but we have to first know, what am I thinking? And why am I thinking? What am I thinking?
Who was that mentor, by the way?
Eric Butterworth.
Thought so.
Yes. Well, Eric's whole thing was, you can change your life by altering your thoughts. That was his mantra. I would add, altering your thoughts is possible, but it's not easy. It takes a lot of work to take responsibility. It takes a lot of work to realize, wow, you know what? I'm not putting forth 100%, and I'm projecting that into my partner and saying, oh, look what you're not doing, versus taking personal responsibility and look at what I'm not doing.
So even when you're a victim, you can be personally 100% responsible for the situation of your life.
There are some studies that show, even with motor vehicle accidents, for example, that somehow we invite these accidents to occur. Somehow, something about our energy. There was a few years back, there was this whole big movement with this book, The Secret, right? That basically your truest intentions can manifest.
You'll draw it to you, good or bad.
Right. I think the issue is you have to know what your truest intentions are. And many of our truest intentions are not conscious. They're unconscious. And that's when it probably, Oprah has this segment she calls it What I Know For Sure, right? And I can tell you, one thing that I know for sure is that there's a part of our mind that we don't have access to. That's the unconscious mind. And nobody really talks about the unconscious as far as mainstream. We don't have a real good ability to put our hands around what that means. But I can go into it more if you'd like.
So what did you think when I asked you to be on this show called Breaking Through?
What did I think of it?
Yeah, in terms of actually as a model.
I think we all have the ability to break through. The question is, what are we breaking through, right? I think of the aha moment. In general, I like to think of biology, psychology, social, and spiritual. So, the biopsychosocial spiritual context, really to me, which is the whole person. So,
yeah, well, actually, we were alluding to something earlier about the whole thing about, people, say, setting a goal for themselves. And the question is whether they really believe it or not. In other words, in the Buddhist model, it's this thing about kind of that many different realms exist in this moment. The question is, which one are you going to commit to? So, and breakthrough, in my sense, breakthrough kind of is in that category as well, that when we can set goals for ourselves and move towards them. The question is actually, are we really committed to them, or are we divided within ourselves? This is sounding more abstract than I thought it was going to be. Anyway.
No, but actually, what I'm associating to now when I think of breakthrough is really finding our purpose, breaking through to our both internal purpose and external purpose. I like to think of purpose in two ways. So internal purpose, I think of self-actualization, self-realization. Finding out, who are we? How did I get here? That, that eternal question I think all of us have. And then I think we all have an external purpose, which is more, I think, in alignment with our talents, our gifts, or what they call signature strengths.
Actually, the image that I had when you described the first purpose was the ant in the ant farm, or the ant in the ant colony, knowing that ant knowing what his purpose is. Are you talking about actually the kind of like based upon what our skills, like different kinds of worker ants, for example, have different things that they're supposed to perform? Is any part of that, in other words, what our skill set is as beings, as operating beings in the world, and finding a purpose on it was doing our daily work, making our contribution? Am I jibing with what you're talking about right now?
Well, the question is, what is that task? What is that particular role that we are supposed to have that is in alignment with, what in Hinduism is called dharma? We were talking about that right before we started. This idea of that we have some divine purpose, something that we are naturally not just predisposed to do, but we are, ultimately supposed to work and find and get to. The question is, what is that particular purpose? And I think it has many phases and many levels. Hopefully we find it. I don't think everybody does.
And I think I would agree with that, the idea of an unfolding, that the purposes are multi-leveled and multifaceted, and kind of one is kind of the end of one is the beginning of the next.
Right. So it's almost like each chapter as it unfolds gives us information if we're looking, though. So am I looking for each lesson that's inherent in the experience? I mean, I frequently, I'm an addiction psychiatrist, right? So I frequently will tell people, listen, I could move to Jamaica and smoke weed for the next 40 years and sit on the beach, but I don't think that would be in alignment with my purpose. So I think, I like to think of it as a purpose-driven highway, right? So we're on this purpose-driven highway at birth, and then as long as we stay on it, I think we can find that ultimate goal. But a lot of times, right, we take detours. Unfortunately, I think some people never get back on that purpose-driven highway.